Thank you, Liam. Thank you very much. Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to be with you today. My name is John, and I have the disease of alcoholism, and I've been a member of a GAPE group. Matter of fact, I'm a co-founder of that group as a meditation group. They actually practice the 11th step every week by praying and meditating in a circle of people very much like people are here today. I am in my 50th year of sobriety, and so I've been at this for quite a while. I'm 74 years old with adult children and 3 beautiful granddaughters. I mentioned that I'm 74 years old and embarking on a new career path. I'm writing my first book, basically from this workshop of expanding God conscious. And I've been working on that throughout the summer and hopefully have that completed by the end of the summer. I also scheduled myself to write 2 other books, one on mindfulness for the 12-stepper and a handbook for emotional sobriety. I also got my credentials recently to be a mental health coach. And so the reason I mention this is that I hear people sometimes when they say at a certain age, well, I'm too old. And I'd like to share with you that nobody is too old, that we're all in the beginning and we're becoming something. This day and our age really doesn't matter. So, last Tuesday we had a conversation about most of the steps. And the first thing I was attempting to provide is the difference between praying with words intellectually and experiencing prayer and meditation. There are 2 distinct differences there. Many of us are taught as children to pray with words, and there's something wrong with that, by the way. I'm not suggesting there's something wrong with that. But what it is when we involve all of our senses in prayer, it becomes an experience, and it can be very moving when we are all in on the experience of God. So we have these senses. We have the external senses. We have internal senses given to us as part of being in the human family. And prayer and meditation is the perfect way of involving all the senses we possibly can to encounter the real God. So this is what I like to point out is the first distinction, the difference between praying using words or heads or intellect without our full capacity of our body. It's beautiful when prayer is actually accomplished when we use both our mind and our bodies. Prayer is about really setting ourselves up to experience that, reminding ourselves that we're approaching the presence of God. And this can make prayer so much deeper and better for any one of us. And what am I speaking about here? I'm speaking about the preparation of realizing we're going into a sacred space. Today in our meeting is a sacred space. It's a sacred conversation we're having. It's an intimate conversation. It's about my experience of God in my life and how I'd interpret it, and the challenges around prayer and meditating and saying yes to God, even though I'm uncertain and confused much of the time. But to be able to share that with you is an extraordinary mission I have in my life, because I just sense this is what God would like me to do. So, one of the things that we prepare ourselves is what the Greeks used to call kenosis. Kenosis is emptying oneself, and it can be best described as set-aside prayer. So I'm going to ask you to think about for a moment about the preoccupation that every one of us walk around with all the time. It's not like people aren't preoccupied. Things where you are distracted, We have priorities, some met, some not met. We have concerns and fears. We have an environment that's going on around us. And what happens is we kind of withdraw from the present moment because we're sitting thinking about our lives. See, life is very much like we've been talking about in prayer. Life is to be experienced, not just to be thought of. We can't think our way through life, because what happens when we think our way through life, what we're doing is comparing, analyzing, concluding, judging, evaluating. All of those conditions in which the brain works is separating us from the moment, from the now experience. And the only way we can deal with that is to get out of our head, so to speak, and get into, I'm going to call it the heart space. Get into our bodies, pay attention to the sensation in our bodies, and really be engaged in an activity. So what kenosis is the emptying of the preoccupations, the conclusions we have, the judgments we have. All of that stuff to empty out in the moment. Not to keep it empty, by the way. This is just a temporary or deferred thing. We're going to do that here at this moment because I'd like you to be as fully available to your higher power as you possibly can be. You see, friends, I'm not an authority on this subject. I have no degree in theology. I'm not a pastor or a minister or a priest. I've been a guy who's been through hell. That's my credentials. I've been through hell. And I think each of you can understand that place because I believe each of you have gone through hell. And maybe you're still going through hell. So it's about my experience and my interpretation of the spiritual life I'm presenting you today. And if I can pass on something, this idea of letting go, about emptying, about becoming a dry sponge, or like a child, if you like, waiting to be filled up with the Spirit. This is the place we want to be. We want to lean in and be fully engaged. So this is a moment that I want to share with you that has more to do with you and your higher power than it is with me. So I'm just going to ask you right now to use your constructive imagination. An inner sense that each human being has that we were actively using as children, by the way, without even thinking about doing it. You remember what it was like when you were a child, how you're playing? That the person beside you who you just met was your best friend? That you forgot what time it was or what time to be home because you're just enjoying yourself being with other people, doing an activity that you didn't know how to do, but you just pretended to do it in the best of your ability. So that's how life is to be led. But as adults, what happens is we start thinking. We start needing to know things. We start being conservative and limited. And we forget about our constructive imagination. So I'm asking you to go back and to look at this constructive imagination and use it in this moment of prayer with you. Now, so the only thing that matters right now is that you are here and available. And as you have emptied yourself out of every preoccupation you have, imagine it falling on the floor. You know, it might be a judgment you have about yourself, for instance. Just let it go. Just let it go temporarily. You can pick it up later. Some conclusion you have about other people. Just let it go. All the things you think you know about your life, now is the time just to let it go. As if you don't know. I want you in an area of vulnerability and uncertainty. To be open to receive what God is going to present to you in a few moments. And he can't present things to you when we're so sure of what we know and so certain of who we are. See, it's like a wall being built between you and the higher power. And what we're doing at this moment is breaking down that wall. We're becoming authentically real. Notice in the moment I say we're going to do an exercise and experience prayer, you may have now invited an expectation that it's going to look a certain way, that you're going to have a certain kind of experience. I'm going to ask you right now to let go of that. You see, in prayer and meditation, we're not in control. We are open to direction and guidance and even correction from our God. So just sit with me for a moment. Put your hands on your lap. Move your palms of your hands up towards the skies. So you're physically ready or showing that you're ready to receive some special grace. Now I'd like you to be present in this moment. This, my friends, take intention. Because most of the time our brain's rushing, even chaotically, to recent past or long ago. Jump into the future, near or far. And we're rarely in the present moment. But the present moment is the only place where we can meet God. Because the past doesn't exist and the future hasn't happened yet. So where do we meet God? Where do we experience God? We experience God now in this moment. So if you're willing to place your attention on your breath, focusing your breath immediately brings you to the moment. Interesting, isn't it? It's only our breath that has us come to the present moment. Because if you're paying attention to your breathing, you're experiencing the now. Just for a moment, enjoy God giving us the oxygen to survive. And take a deep breath through your nostrils and fill up your lungs with life. Hold for a moment and exhale through your mouth, making a slight swishing sound. And once again, take a deep breath. Inhale the living love of God. Hold for the moment and exhale through your mouth. Now I'm going to ask you to do it the third time. Inhale the Spirit of God and hold for a moment. And exhale. I just ask you to pay attention to what I'm saying, or what I'm saying to you, but you don't have to really focus on it. Just allow yourself to go wherever you're going. So imagine going on a journey into the spiritual world. It's another dimension. There is no destination or traveling on this journey. It's more about where we place our attention. So go inward to your private world. You may close your eyes if you want, separating you from the outside world. That's right. Allow yourself to relax while paying attention to your breath. Notice the Spirit moving in you. You may be amazed. Maybe you haven't felt the Spirit as you're feeling it right now. Pay attention to God within you as you participate in this encounter. consent to God's presence while basking in this rest and peace of His grace. Friends, notice your heart space is filled with your actual and sacred identity, your strengths, your values, like love, kindness, tolerance, empathy, and caring. Place your attention on God, who has and is forgiven you for any transgressions. The stain that was on your soul has now been cleansed and forgotten. Continue to notice and feel serenity, acceptance, courage, and wisdom that's being provided at this very moment for you to deal with what needs to be dealt with. Maybe, if you wish to, offer a few words of thanks to your higher power. Wonderful. Now use your visual imagination, that inner sense we talked about earlier, and see yourself walking over to your higher power with a square, brown, cardboard box. And inside your box is your will in your life. And handing it freely over to your God. Watch how God accepts it and cherishes it. You feel comfortable and at ease. Attend to your heart space and feel that it is more malleable and soft as a result of this encounter. It feels like a wet, sobbing sponge full of love. You feel the love of God, love for yourself and everyone in your life. Without understanding or knowing, this experience has changed you forever. That is what happens when you experience prayer and meditation. See, you can't be left unchanged with an encounter with your God. Every breath that you're taking is causing you, so you are becoming something bigger than you were before. Listen to my voice. And I'd like you to gently return to this meeting. You're feeling full of gratitude for the experience that you just had. And as you begin to open your eyes, you feel rested and awake. Okay, friends, welcome back. See, this experience I wanted to give you because I don't want to talk to you about the spiritual world. Talking about it isn't really that helpful. However, experiencing is very different. What I'd like you to do is to think about, is this a worthwhile exercise for you? Does this help you in increasing your belief in a higher power that cares deeply for you? Now, what you find, if you participated, you may have had a spiritual experience. If you didn't participate, you got to meet your resistance, which is a beautiful thing to have happen. If you did participate and you didn't feel anything, that's a wonderful thing too, because it gets you to see that how much you want to control your life and unwilling to let go. And that's a perfect thing for you to realize. See, there is nothing but 100% learning opportunity in prayer and meditation. It's not about getting right or wrong. It's about learning about that experience and what gets in front of you. All of that stuff is spiritual diamonds. Now, sometimes what happens when we pray is we don't like to see what comes up because we find it confronting. But now at least we're aware. You see, in the prayer experience, what appears is an honest appraisal. You get to meet yourself, not the way you'd like to be or how you would like other people to see you, but who you're actually being. Because there's no one to impress. There's no errors to be made. There's no social masks that need to come off. In a prayerful experience, you get to meet you. Not to condemn or rate you, but to show you. To show you who you're being. Awareness, an important key to living a life worth living. Maybe you didn't get much out of the exercise, and that's perfect too. See, there's no discounting the experience. We got what we got. We don't set up expectation because we're really following God's direction. We're letting go. We're surrendering. We're coming in here powerless. And we're following through that prayer experience as a powerless, surrendering individual, consenting to God's presence and allowing God to change us in a way in which He wants us changed. Sorry for the pronouns. It's just how I grew up. These are special, precious insights. Something to do something about or not. It's entirely up to you. Some of you may have gotten a real or a great deal out of this experience. And that's perfect too. We are invoking this constructive imagination to make this experience real as it can possibly be. And as I said earlier, like children playing with imaginary friends, creating pleasant situations, and having terrific growing up careers like firefighters and police officers, priests, and even Cape Crusaders. Our souls were soaring. But then we had to pay the first hydro bill, the first insurance bill. But don't forget, this is God-given ability that we have, and as often as adults is underutilized. Constructive imagination in your prayer. So not only are we praying with our minds and praying with our bodies, we're using the sense called constructive imagination. So we're more involved, more physically and mentally, emotionally involved in the experience. Now, by show of hands, I can't see everybody, of course, but a show of hands, was that moment we had together in prayer and meditation, was it pleasant? Was it restful? Yeah? Okay. Did you have a spiritual experience here today? Just show me your hands if you did or if you did. And so, yeah, excellent. Do you feel in this moment, this very moment, an increase of love today? Anybody? Great. Is your higher power a little more real to you today as a result of having this encounter? Anybody? Yeah. Excellent. So now comes the big hard question. Why don't we do it more often? I've never met a person that says I prayed enough or meditated enough. What I hear often, and what I say, is I have excuses. I'm busy. I didn't feel like it. A TV program might be a little more enticing than that experience. Who's saying that? Where is that coming from? And this is what I'd like to share with you about that opposing, conflicting idea. Here in prayer, we just encountered something that's absolutely beautiful. And we were given the very things that we were always looking for and deeply needed. Remember that Carl Jung? Spiritum contra spiritus. We're always searching for this fundamental idea of God. And we're searching by buying things and getting power, having more money, influencing people, getting recognition. We're always searching for that place called home. And yet, in a few minutes, no matter how much sobriety you had, what step you are on, you just experience an encounter with God. Now, today, in this moment, hearts get changed in that moment. So what are the distractions? What prevents us from really utilizing this power that we put a container around it? You ever use the word container? Oh, my prayer time. Oh, I pray in the morning, or I pray for a half an hour, I pray for 50 minutes, I pray for morning, lunch, and dinner. Whatever it is, we're containing this power and only looking in it when we feel that we want to look in it. It's a paradox, isn't it? Why don't we consistently and for longer extended periods of time to involve ourselves in this kind of an activity? And this is our conversation for the rest of today. Answer to these questions, some of you may mean that something about yourself. In other words, well, I'm not disciplined enough, or I'm not good enough, or I have too many problems. You see, we give ourselves excuses why we don't do the very thing that provides freedom, that provides the idea of well-being and happiness. What are we listening to instead? Who are we listening to? So what happens in this case is when we start making claims about ourselves, labeling ourselves, we use something called self-rating. I'm not good enough. Or I haven't been sober long enough. Or I have too many problems I have to deal with. And we use these excuses that prevent us from getting to the source that's causing our very being. Causing. I want you to get that word. It's very important. Causing. One of the definitions I love, and I want to separate two things: God's will and doing God's will. What's God's will? God's will is the primary cause of everything and everybody. I want you to get that distinction. God is causing me right in this moment, being and becoming. He is causing you in this very moment of being and becoming. We are expanding in the experience of God's world at this moment. What prevents us from growing is something that we use in our heads, and it's called self-rating. I'm not good enough. I have too many defects of character. And I stop paying attention to the very thing that gives me life, and I get distracted. It's almost magnetically to what's wrong with me. What's wrong with me? It seems to be an appeal that I have. And who is ordering that appeal? Who is that? Is it me or is it somebody else? So none of this self-rating is actually true. It's not true. Did you know that there's something is opposing you from accepting the invitation of an encounter with God? There's something that's opposing you. You know, there's reasons why we don't devote enough time with the encounter of God, and none of it is your fault. Just know that. This is not your fault. I want to set up this idea of there's two people inside of us. One person, of course, you only see one John here, and I only see one Victor here. But inside Victor and John and Deborah are two different people. One is called the true self, and the other is called the false self. So what I'm about to present to you is a reduction of reality. It is a model. And it doesn't encompass the complexity of a human being, but it gives us an area that we can look at and start to distinguish that there are two things happening in a human being. One is called the false self, commonly called the ego. The other is the true self, and the true self we just experienced a few moments ago. Once again, your ego is not your fault. It is part of the human experience and how we evolved as a human being. We'll not get rid of it, so we might as well learn to be good neighbors. The true self is the self that God created. When we follow the true self, we're fulfilled. We're joyful. We have purpose. We have energy and enthusiasm about our lives. We get to see the good in other things and other people. The ego, however, is fearful. It's conniving. It wants more. Nothing is ever enough. It recognizes how bad I am or how I can be, how weak I am. And the reason why it keeps pulling me to that is because it wants to remain in control. There's a control issue happening here. The true self and the false self are just two different ways of being in the world. There's two separate things. Equally, we can choose one over the other. The true self is not influenced by our environment or the conditioning we grew up with. It isn't influenced by that. The false self is what we become when we're influenced by our environment and the training that we received growing up. So it's a conditioning factor. You think about as a young child, you try to make sense of the world, and you couldn't make sense of the world. So you come about some conclusions about big adults and about self and about other people. And you come to believe those things were true, even though as a young child, you didn't have the maturity to discern what you were concluding. You just accepted it. And for all of us in this world, what we've done is carried those childhood lessons into adulthood, assuming that they're truthful. And they're so deep in our psyche, we're not even conscious that we're actually expressing them. They're called habits. Social scientists call them automations. They happen out of conscious. We act out what we learned as children until we learn to be aware. So I want you to get the true self is what God created us to be. There's no mistakes. There are no error in design. We were created for a purpose, a real purpose, that we're unique. We're unique the way we were created, and we're unique to our own special perspective on our experience. But that's what makes us so powerful and beautiful in the world. See, we're not lemmings. You ever see a video of a lemming, a crowd of lemmings all running over the cliff, and they're following their leader blindlessly to death? Well, human beings aren't that. We're unique. And what we offer the world is our unique experience and perspective. We of Alcoholics Anonymous understand the value of the experience. That the hell that we went through and that grace that pulled us out can be shared in a unique way. Only you can share it, your experience, in a unique way to help someone else. That's sacred. That's divine. That's special. So God created us not by error or mistake or even flawed. He created us in the true self, our identity. Our identity is filled with values and strengths, which unfortunately we've invaded through ignorance. I'll go on to that in a moment. It is our authentic self and always in harmony with God. So I want you to get the order here. This is not chaos, it's order. That we were created, provided a divine dignity, and now we set in our world to learn how to go about expressing that. And for us who are addicts here in this room, understand completely how we misinterpret that, how we couldn't get clear with our identity to act out in a way that was congruent with God's intention. And that's what makes us so beautiful, friends. It's just that we were so visible in misunderstanding what we were to do. We were so mixed up and confused. And that's what makes us. See, it's not, in my view, it is our weaknesses and our confusion and our struggle is what makes us beautiful. It's not what we know. So this authentic self is in harmony with God's intention. And we experienced that in that little meditation we did earlier on. That God was present for us, pouring out his love, his forgiveness, his mercy, his kindness and empathy, the courage and serenity, the wisdom in which we pray for was being poured into us because we said yes in the experience, because we were available, and because we used our imagination to make it real for us. Now we're better fortified to live out or express that identity. You see, I grew up thinking I was the first cause, that I had to do this. Self-sufficient. And last Tuesday, we talked about this idea. What does it mean to be restless, irritable, and discontent? And we spoke about this idea of it is all about a self-centered filter. And when we're restless, irritable, and discontent, we're trying to control something that we can't control. Thereby, what we're doing is creating our own restlessness, irritability, discontent. We have to learn along this way of self-acceptance. the surrendering, the letting go of. And then as we continue to go that path, what opens up for us is rest, ease, and comfort, peace and joy. Because our lives are no longer our lives anymore, like we've indicated in the third step. They have been turned over. Our life and our will has been turned over. So I am no longer the first cause of anything. God is my first cause. That's his will. What I had to do is to learn how to express that will, that becoming. And that's where I failed miserably at. So the false self is a persona. We make it to fit or to please others. See, this false self is always trying to fit in. It's always trying to move around. It's always looking for approval. It's always trying to force something, pretend something, avoid something. That's what the ego does. See, imagine for a moment that the brain lies. It lies to ourselves. We like to think of ourselves as being honest, and we're probably honest with each other, but to ourselves, it's easy to lie. And we call it different things. Call it rationalization, gaslighting, spinning, just looking at the positives. We use all kinds of expressions like that. But I'll tell you what doesn't lie in us, and that's our heart space. Our body sensations. It doesn't lie. It's not capable of lying. It doesn't have the intelligence to distinguish what's acceptable and what isn't. It just simply responds. So getting connected to that idea, that not to trust the thinking, but with the cognitive distortion that brains have, but to begin to trust the heart space, the intuitive thought, as Bill Wilson would call it, to start paying attention to that will give us direction, that will tell us when we're wandering off the path. And there's more about that later. See, what's happening at every moment in our lives, friends, is this idea that we can be growing as a result of the experience we're having if we're in the present moment. And if we're not in the present moment and we're somewhere else, we miss this completely. And there's good reason why we miss it, by the way, because we want to avoid the pain that's in front of us. Because life can be painful. That's for certain. I cringe sometimes when I hear, oh, life will get better. It's not true. None of us can predict someone's life is going to get better. But what we can stand 100% certain of, they will get better. That they will be gaining skills that will help them cope and be resilient around anything that happens to them. So being in the present moment can be painful. And I'll tell you, one thing an alcoholic does not like is pain. We are the great examples of people that would do anything but to feel the pain that we're feeling, because what we would do, we'd drink instead. Of course. That's what an alcoholic does. Wants to feel better. Wants to numb the experience of the present moment. And this is gained over many years of drinking and living in that life like that. So what we have to do, and when we come to the program, is unlearn that and becoming mindful about the experience and paying attention to the experience so that we can live in freedom. So the ego is the voice of the false self. It speaks and commands us directly. It's always in conflict with our true self. The ego keeps us from being authentic and living our lives according to values and principles. It wants to survive. It's a rat. It's a rat that will do anything to survive. And it's in direct conflict with the true self. The true self wants to love. It wants to rest in God's hands. It wants to naturally reach out and help other people. That's who we are as human beings. So we return to our true self, we stop identifying with the ego and start identifying with the true self. So we've got a question of what's urgent here. This is what distracts us from the experience that we had. The ego shouts at us. God whispers. The ego demands. God invites. The ego tells you what's wrong with you. God looks at and says, here's your strengths and values. So this is going on all the time, this ambivalence, this debate, whether you're conscious with it or not. And unfortunately, we listen to the loudest, urgent voice that demands rather than invites, because it wants to satisfy the ways of the world. So God is much quieter. The Spirit is quieter. It is saying, come and see. Come on and see. I will give you everything in your life that's important to you. Just come and be with me. And what do? Well, the untrained person who doesn't know the distinction between the false self and the true self will always run to the ego. So once again, we make this distinction, not like it's fully true, but as a model. And because we make this distinction, we now have a choice to make today. Am I going to listen to my ego, or am I going to listen to God? So pay attention. You know, social scientists, once again, well, 60% of our lives is an automation. In other words, we are in habit. We're not making conscious decisions. We're not choosing. We're just going along like a robot or a zombie, walking through life, walking, but asleep. When we learn to be mindful, we begin to see those glaring things and we're able to make better choices for ourselves by saying, I'm going to interrupt this pattern because this particular pattern is unhealthy. It's not helpful. And now I can make a better choice because I'm awake. So when we feel the pull of the ego, you can know confidently that you can ask God for help to bring you back to that sacred space, that inner room that we just experienced, and to be able to feel the peace and joy and love that He has for each of His children. So that not only can we get through another day, but we can be fortified. We can be strengthened. That we have all the confidence in the world, whatever there is to overcome, with God's help, we can overcome it. I like to think of it this way, friends. There's a identity in God's world, and there's behaviors. There's a continuum. There's both ends. If I can align myself to the God's intention and purpose for me and be in that identity, my behaviors automatically improve. I don't have to try to change. They improve immediately. If I'm conscious that God's intention for me to be today is to love another human being and follow that directive and believe in that directive, I then will more likely act in a loving, kind way. Not 100% of the time, more likely. There is a correlation to what I think I am, that self-image, to my behaviors. Now, conversely, the ego says you're broken. You're bad. You're angry. You're envious. You're greedy. And from that space, what is the natural expression of that? What is the behaviors that connect to that? And I think each of you know the answer to it. What we want to do in prayer and meditation is to get into the God's identity, that sacred space of goodness and of love and of kindness and empathy, the willingness to care for and help other people. That same prayer we ask God in the third step, that he care for us. By extension, we will care for other people. That's what we want to get connected to. That's the path we want to open up. So know we have a choice. We don't have to follow the demands of the ego. We want to operate from our true selves. If we feel at peace and in harmony, and if we feel stressed or scattered, we work from our ego. That's what we're working from. So these are clues. We're afraid, we're scattered. You know, it's interesting. This is a side note, by the way, and I can't give you the exact word, but in the Hebrew Bible, for instance, one of the names they give the devil can be translated as scattered. Interesting, isn't it? Scattered. You ever been scattered? I have. You have no foundation. You're not on solid ground. You don't know what to do next. You're kind of stuck like a deer in headlights. You're scattered. The work of the ego. So there's so many benefits of not allowing our ego to define us. See, the ego is there, but it doesn't have to define us. We can listen to it and observe it. We don't have to follow it. We can practice just observing it and allowing it to do what it does without acting in it. So here are some benefits of not allowing the ego to define us. We become happier and more peaceful when the ego does not control us. We become less judgmental and more accepting of others. These are just a few high-level benefits that we get. We get to develop compassion for other people. And we no longer see them as separate from ourselves. I love the story I tell sometimes. I don't know if I've told you this. If you heard it before, forgive me. See, I can use the excuse now. I'm 74 years old. I can repeat myself. It's like looking in the forest, right? It's looking at the forest, and what you do is see individual trees. Now, if you're looking at the forest above ground, you would say these are independent trees. They're not one forest. Because you can actually see, like I can see you here, you're in different squares. And if I'm looking at the squares, I can say you're each individual people, different from one another. And I'd be right. And as I looked at a forest, I would say the same things and I would be right. But what you don't see is the root system underneath the forest. Did you know that trees share water through their root system? They share nutrition. They are all connected. See, that is a metaphor for what you and I are. Yeah, we're different. Yeah, we have different experiences. We have different perspectives. But deeper and greater than that, we are one. And as you continue this work in prayer and meditation, this becomes obvious to you. So I wouldn't do something harmful to you because it would be harmful to me. You see the connection? There's no stopping that. If I get mad at you, guess what? I get mad at me. I lose moments in time because I think I'm separate from you. I'm exclusive. And that's not true. We are one. We're in unity. And the more we can share the love and kindness and understanding about our experience with each other, the more we can feel that for ourselves. There's freedom and how we express the principles and what we learned here. So we experience a more profound connection with others. We're no longer alone, separate, isolated, different, standing on the edge of the perimeter. When I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, you know where you find me? Right at the wall, at the back door, so I could be the first one to leave. As if to say to myself, and I didn't realize it then, but I can share with you now, if I step in that room, I'm going to be the same as you, and I don't want to be the same as you. I'm different. So what I did was to stand at the exterior, the perimeter of the hall, because I felt different. And sometimes the simple movement into the middle of the room helps break down that exclusivity. To this day, when I'm in a meeting, I'm always in the front row and in the center, because I want to belong. Lastly, we become more compassionate towards ourselves, and we realize that we're not perfect and it's okay. See, in behind what we're thinking is that this perfectionism and all or nothing thinking. These are distortions that invade our decision making and our choices. And if I have a perfectionist context, when I fall short, which has got to be often, I make it mean something about myself against the standard of perfection. Oh, and here's the weirdest thing about life. All of us know that we're not perfect. We know it here. And intellectually, we know it. But our experience is often different than what we know. So I judge myself according to being perfect at an emotional or physical level, even though I know I'm not perfect and never will be. That causes restlessness, irritability, and discontent. It causes self-criticism, that inner critic that we seem to have that keeps telling us that we're not good enough. All set up naively by me because I have a perfectionist attitude. So, a life lived by true self is full of love, joy, peace, and compassion. All of us are capable of having that kind of love, regardless of what our experience has been. Once again, I point to the meditation that we started this meeting on, that we can experience that at any moment, at any time. It's available to us. We don't have to pay for it. We don't have to know anything about it. We can just simply experience it. How do we become good neighbors of the ego without blindly needing to follow its commands? How do I become that good neighbor? It's my experience that there is a separation of will and skill here. Will and skill. This is the connection between the physical and the spiritual world. The thin place where earth and that touches heaven. The thin place, the Celtic expression, where the world and heaven touch. Will is more about a spiritual motive. The will of God causing everything and everyone. That God is causing me in a kind of cause and effect way to grow and fulfill my purpose in life. You know that the universe is continually increasing as we speak? It's never stopped growing. God has never stopped creating or becoming. It is constant and continual. Everything in the universe is expanding, including us. We're the ones that try to halt it and divert it. Stop it. That's where the angst comes from. And all we need to do is to allow it to take place. So we too are constantly evolving, becoming something more significant than we were before. I want you to get that. I really want you to get that. I don't want you to think about it. I want you to let it go into your heart. That God has given you something very special to be bigger than who you are at the moment. And all we have to do is to allow it. So we too are being caused to becoming something greater naturally. There's a Greek phrase, ego eimi. I am. I exist. Ego eimi. I am a child of God. Beautiful in its nature. With goodness at the center. Ego eimi. I am. However, to fulfill what I'm being caused, I may require skills. Isn't that why we study the big book, study and act on the big book? Because there's a mystical dance that has to happen between this God who's causing and creating us and expanding us, and for us to fulfill in skills that which is being and needs to be expressed in us. That's why we study the big book. We study for new ways and methods of how to live our lives. There might be something required of us. But what I'm saying here today, oddly enough, is the concern for the over-spiritualization of my behavior. You know, friends, we could precisely know how to fulfill what I'm being caused. But maybe I don't. And if I don't, I need to acquire new skills. And if I don't know how to be a good neighbor to my ego, I need to learn more about it than expecting God to look after it for me. That's just the reality. See, the spiritual life is fantastic and it's life-giving and it's the first cause of everything we do, but we don't want to turn it into a superstition. Why? Because we have a context of all or nothing thinking. That's a distortion. That God is going to do everything or I'm going to do everything. I have a natural cognitive distortion around that. It's called all or nothing thinking. And I need to be balanced in this view. So here's some of the skills that's really meant a great deal for me in my well-being. Mindfulness. What is mindfulness? It's the practice of living in the present moment and being aware of what is happening inside and outside of myself. It means learning to focus my thoughts, my feelings without judgment and accept them. Mindfulness can be used to make better choices and enjoy a life that's well lived. Mindfulness. It is getting in the present moment. It is practicing paying attention to your breath. Practicing, if you're walking, pay attention to your feet that's on the pavement. If it's looking through nature, to be focused on the nature in which you're experiencing. Sunset, the same thing. In your eyes of the children, your neighbors. Paying attention that you're so present to the experience and you're fully engaged in it. This is mindfulness, and it's a practice. It's a skill. Emotional sobriety is another skill. It's the ability to be emotionally intelligent and to react maturely to the events and stimulus in our lives, to use our emotions as compasses to help us live more meaningful and fulfilling lives. Emotional sobriety is taking whatever life throws our way and using it for good. Self-acceptance. Do you know how many people I talk to that continually condemns themselves, that wish they were some other way, that they're working on some other way of being or behaving? I spent a lot of years thinking that way. Oh, if only I had this, if only I could be that, if I could only be some other place. Meaning, unfortunately, what I was missing out on, you got it, the present moment, the experience that I'm in. Self-acceptance is the practice of unconditionally accepting myself. It includes all aspects of myself, both positive and negative. It is the practice of understanding and accepting one's life experience without judgment. Judgment, harsh judgment to ourselves is harmful. Now, don't think that judgment is harmful. That's the brain, the way it works. It judges. And thank God it does. Because we get to choose things as a result of our good judgment or bad judgment, unfortunately. But to judge ourselves is unhealthy and harmful. Learning coping and resilience strategies to deal with the ego. You know, coping and resilience strategies are techniques to help us deal with different emotions and thoughts. Coping strategies can involve things like distraction, problem solving, and positive self-talk. Resilience strategies include building social support and developing positive outlooks and accepting some of the things that are outside our control. Self-compassion, the practice of treating oneself with kindness and understanding, especially in difficult moments. It involves recognizing that we all make mistakes and feel the pain, that instead of harshly judging ourselves, we can give ourselves compassion and we need to move forward. Can you look in the mirror, friends, and say, I am your best friend? Can you? Look in the mirror tonight and say to yourself, I am your best friend. This may involve gentle words of encouragement, a hug, or simply sitting with our feelings and allowing them to be. Strength finding and development and expression. You know, I know a lot of alcoholics, a lot, and I have talked to them for over the years, and I've listened to myself over the years. And one thing that's been confirmed over and over again, in my eyes at least, that people can identify what's wrong with them and articulate it to about every angle possible. They can communicate it. They've looked at it. They are even obsessed about it. They continually return to it, so much so that they can communicate it effectively and clearly. When asked people, what are their strengths? Invariably, people will stall and stop. And they start mentally searching for them because it's not apparent to them as their defects of character. And I had to learn a more balanced approach to life because what I was doing, I was defining myself on my defects of character alone, which isn't the whole story. I have strengths. I was disconnected to them. I was vaguely aware of them, but I couldn't articulate them to you easily so that I could communicate to you exactly what they were. Strength finding and development and expression of strengths to unlock the potential within a human being. Now, we're overly invested in what's wrong with us rather than what's right with us. Strength awareness is the first phase of this three-phase process. When we discover our strengths, we can develop them by adding energy and effort to improve them and what has naturally been given to us as a human being. We can see our true identity by God reflecting on his expressions of those strengths. See, this isn't me bragging about strengths I have. How could I brag about a gift that I've been given? I didn't cause the gift. But because I was disconnected with it, I want you to get this picture. Because I was disconnected to the gifts that God has given me, I was always in a place of angst because I wasn't fulfilling what I truly valued. Can you get that? And no amount of pretending would allow that nagging to go away until I identified my strengths, developed them, and expressed them as best that I could each and every day. That is when the identity, the sacred identity, the path, and the behavior becomes straight and clear. You'll be able to see easily now and powerfully maybe how our egos can be from keeping us from abandoning our lives to God. The ego demands attention because it requires earthly responses to our urgencies. We tend to listen to it rather than the whispers of God. God is more powerful, but the ego is clearly heard. When we learn to deal with our humanity, allowing the path of God causing to be clear, our pathways of becoming is clear. We can become, we can becoming. Once you get the verb, not to become, we're not waiting for anything. There's no destination here. It is the expansion of an individual that is becoming in this moment. The ego in me. This is my journey. This has been a short capitulation of my 50 years of recovery. The ups and downs, the pausing, the avoiding, the approaching, the experimenting, learning new resources, saying yes to God sometimes and saying no at other times. I have not arrived, friends. I am continuing my journey today with you. God is continually revealing more to me as I surrender to Him. Do not allow the false self to define who you are, friends. The ego says, I am bad, making me feel worse about myself. The true self says, I have been bad, and my behavior needs correcting. Think about what I just said to you. It's very different. But it will never say I am bad, because I was created in the likeness and image of God. Imagio Dei, the Latin phrase, the image of God. I was created in that image. So if I am created in that image, how can I be bad? Now, I have done bad things, a behavioral thing, but my identity stands clear today. Imagio Dei. I was made in the image and likeness of God as you were. And I say amen to each of you. I hope that this talk has inspired you to experience prayer and meditation more often. And I hope you reflect on using your constructive imagination of causing and becoming, expanding through the love and mercy of God. I hope you seek resources to clear your paths and always be congruent with the values and strength that God has provided you. I thank you for your generous listening, friends.